I'm actually sitting outside right now, comrades, because Brother Clarence Thomas is inside giving a talk as well at this very moment and meeting with several members of the community here. Youth, veterans here, folk from the anti-police brutality work, folk from the LGBT community, all types of folk are in the building right now. So I had to step outside to be able to give this report and be heard. So I'll start with Baltimore because that is ground zero. I'm back here for the second time. And, you know, all of the news cameras are gone now. And a lot of the hoopla has calmed down. And a lot of the activists and organizers, you know, who came from all across the country, you know, have now returned to their respective locales. And so, you know, I look at this time, you know, as the perfect time to really get into the communities and do some organizing. You know, now that there's a bus that just passed by. I'm sorry, you all. Now that the hoopla has calmed down, you know, this is really when the nuts and bolts of the real work begins, with empowering the people and educating the people, and kind of like, you know, giving the people some energy to say, hey, we support, you know, the rebellion. How do we go forward and how do we continue to build from now? So today we actually held a press conference. The People's Power Assembly did. Reverend C.D. Witherspoon actually spoke there, and there was a couple of folk there from the Baltimore AP, and we actually had this press conference at the youth jail, which the city is proposing the construction of a brand new youth jail, while at the same time, you know, cutting $11 million from the schools and the public education sector here, which, you know, a lot of community members have really rallied around this campaign and this cause. We're still connecting folk to the PPA, but myself and a couple of other folk here from the PPA went to a meeting last night that the National Action Network had. Reverend Al Sharpton was actually there. It was in the same church, New Shiloh Baptist Church, where Freddie Gray's funeral was actually held. And it was the youth, it was the students who actually brought up this issue. Anywhere from 7-year-olds to 16 and 17-year-olds who were saying and speaking up, wait a minute, you know, the city of Baltimore has money to construct new prisons and a new youth jail, but they're cutting money from, you know, the public schools and the recreation centers. And even at the tender age of 13 and 14, you know, you could see them really questioning, you know, the capitalist crisis. You could see them really questioning the corporations and the banks and the ruling class and the power structure. So, you know, the consciousness is there. The consciousness is in the community, of course, living. You know, they were very courageous and very determined to express themselves over the last 2 weeks, you know, during the rebellion. But again, I think this is our time as a party and also, you know, within the PPA to kind of, you know, offer some in-depth analysis on where we go from here. So it's been great to be involved in that process. The press conference today was a success. It did rattle. We had several officers who came out from the youth detention center just to see what was going on. They called the police. They called the sheriff's office here. And it did rattle some bones, but it's good that they know that the people are still rallying around very important issues besides just the CBS on North and Penn. The next upcoming, I'm sorry, were there any questions or concerns on that? Okay, I'll take that as enough. The next main, I guess, assembly or demonstration that we're going to be having here coming up is the June 6th tribunal. Putting the police actually on trial from the community's perspective, addressing the issues of police terror. We've been getting out information, pamphlets and flyers all over the community. We definitely outreached at the National Action Network last night. There have been people who already called today from seeing the flyer there last night. We'll be getting the same flyer out over the next week within the community. Greenmount, North and Penn, there in the community where Brother Gray was killed. We're penetrating all of these spots that the people are, where oppressed communities are. So we have a small staff here who've been working and putting in a lot of hours. I'm sure folks are very exhausted and tired, but I have to give the branch here some props and some respect because they've definitely stayed the course in answering phones and answering questions and connecting people to the struggle from 8 o'clock in the morning to sometimes 12 o'clock at night. So, that may be a way that comrades can help out if they can alleviate, some of the pressure of community outreach. And even from afar, you can answer the phone and say, okay, well, I'll take your name, I'll take your affiliation or your organization, and then I'll, plug you in with the appropriate persons there. I guess the negative, you've heard some positive, but, the negative in some of the issues that the PPA and the branch here has had is because it has taken some very sharp and strong stances. And, we have defended the youth and the community's right to rebel. And we stood very firm in that. And I'm very proud that, our party has stood very firm in that. But there are some forces here within the city, and we're talking of black folk as well, who have taken a little bit softer of a position. Whether you refer to them as, progressives, liberal, the religious community and clergy folk, or the social democrats. The PPA and the branch here has come under some scrutiny. And there are some folks, who are not willing to work with us because of those political stances. And that's just the reality. So we've been looking for a church to house the tribunal. And this is fresh off the press today, We had 3 churches in mind, first, second, and third option, and Brother C.D. Weatherspoon, has relationships with these ministers and congregations, and so does Sharon. And 2 of them, as of today, have turned us down to have the tribunal there within their congregations. We don't know whether that's because of some other ministers or other pastors behind the scenes telling them, not to work with the PPA and not to, house the tribunal, or whether it's because the congregation or the pastors themselves, disagree with our stance of defending the rebellion. However, folk have remained diligent and remain persistent, and we're going to continue, in the search to kind of nail down a reputable spot that the community can access via public transportation, but at the same time can also house, hundreds of folks there comfortably in the space. So I guess that's the update with the tribunal and some of the dynamics here on the ground. There's also, lastly, there's the amnesty campaign that really has been continued since day 1 or day 2 of the rebellion, as youths were swept up in the curfew, as youths were swept up in the rebellion, such as the 16-year-old brother who was on a $500,000 ridiculous bail for for helping to beautify one of the police vehicles. So, that issue of, hey, these youths have a right to rebel, and we defend that right not only politically, but we defend that right legally. And so the amnesty campaign, has been continued, and the community is in full support of that. There has been some youth who have actually been detained since they've been arrested as of 2 and 3 weeks ago. Of course, some of their families don't have the resources and funds to post bail, and some of them have even been denied bail for various reasons that I'm actually not aware of. But there are a few people who've actually been denied bail. So, this is the police state that the community has been under. This is the police state that really, many persons in many states and cities across the U.S. Have been experiencing. The issue of Sister Marilyn Mosby and the state attorney's willingness to charge the officers is a good thing. That's a good thing. That's a step in the right direction of holding the police who terrorize these communities accountable. And it's a good step towards setting a precedent of accountability. However, there have been some people here in the city who are actually celebrating that and who have really become complacent and satisfied, with that first baby step. And the position of the PPA, the position of several militant, forces and organizations here is, wait a minute, let's not let our guard down. Let's not, sing, shout, and dance because 6 officers have been charged. Until they're actually serving prison time and held fully accountable, this isn't a time to ease off the gas. As a matter of fact, this is a time to, mash the gas even harder to ensure that those officers are held accountable and to ensure that, this precedent is set not only in Baltimore but nationwide. So, I think, some folks have prematurely, even cast her as, thank God, thank Jesus for Marilyn Mosby, and she's going to come under some pressure. I'm sure she already has, from the FOP, the Fraternal Order of Police, and from the City Council and certain political forces here. And we support her, but at the same time, I think it's very important, not only here in Baltimore, but, around the country, to continue keeping the pressure, on the state to hold them accountable. And I just had to add that in there, too. The MOVE demonstration on Wednesday was actually very inspiring for me. It was my first time being a part of a MOVE organized assembly and activity and demonstration and speak out. It was actually held not on Osage Avenue, but it was literally held right across the street from where Osage Avenue ends and runs perpendicular to the street that we had the demonstration on. We got started about 11 o'clock. By 12, there were hundreds of people there. And folks came from all over the U.S. These were folk of all different nationalities, all different political tendencies. You had youth, you had veterans and elders of the community who came out. The Philadelphia Police Department was also in full effect, too. And the organizers there expected that. I think one of the most beautiful elements of that afternoon for me was seeing the descendants of, you know, of MOVE. And these were third and fourth generation descendants of John Africa and Ramona Africa, and they stood very strong. They stood very erect in their history, in their culture, in their resistance. They were very conscious, and they knew the history, you know, that their ancestors had lived. We're talking youth as young as 6 or 7, and then, you know, you had adult youth as well. And to see them all together, united, and to see them undefeated, despite, you know, having 2 bombs dropped on their homes, despite the 62 homes, the entire block that was lost. You know, the youth who stood as representatives, you know, of MOVE, it was just like, wow, man, like, after all of this shit, you know, that you've placed on us, after all of this terror, we refuse to die. You know, we refuse to die. We're still here, we're still strong, and we're still speaking. There were different tendencies there. There were, and I forget all of the different organizations, but there were supporters who, you know, came in from France. There were supporters who came in from the West Coast, supporters who came in from the South. And to see the different organizers there also working together, kind of coordinating things to speak out, you know, lasted for a couple of hours, and then we actually marched past 2 different police precincts down the street, and the community really enjoyed that. I think a lot of folk, you know, are still, even within the city, there are a lot of youth, you know, who had no idea, you know, about the history of Osage Avenue and MOVE. And so it was also a raising of consciousness for the community there. Not only did folks chant, you know, there was a local sister who was a minister there, and man, she was very powerful, and she preached. I mean, she delivered a street sermon as the march was going on, addressing everything from police terror to gentrification and poverty and the prison industrial complex, connecting all of these dots openly for the community to be able to engage, plug in, and learn something. And that was just a beautiful, beautiful sight. You know, there's the 6 officers are charged here, but most recently has been the case of Tony Robinson. And, you know, it definitely rubbed the people wrong, from the Black Lives Matter movement to, you know, even folk within the social justice, social democrat movement, that the officer who murdered Tony Robinson is not being held accountable, is not going to be indicted. And I remember watching the indictments, the formal charges of the 6 officers here, sitting, you know, in Colleen's living room. And we came here to the center where everybody was that Saturday morning. And I remember speaking with Brother Holmes about it and saying, you know, I was completely shocked that those officers were even charged. And in this case, in Tony Robinson's case, the officer was not charged and is not being indicted. And honestly, you know, and I'm just going to speak from my own perspective here for a moment, and not as a representative of the party, but I've gotten to the point where I don't expect justice. I don't expect justice. I don't expect officers to be held accountable. I really don't, you know, and I think there's a lot of youth, you know, who have taken that same mindset. Because it's happened so often, so many other times. And even with George Zimmerman, who was charged or indicted and went to trial, he was found not guilty. And I think that the party and also, the PPAs across the country, I think we have to address that sentiment. I think we have to address that. And how do the communities, how do oppressed people begin to secure justice for themselves when the state and when the courts, when the judges deny us justice? How do we do that? That's still to be figured out, and it was upsetting, but honestly, I really didn't even expect, any justice in that case. When Eric Garner is videoed from beginning to end, pleading, for his life and pleading, just to be heard. And you have 5 officers who were caught on video from beginning to end, murdering him. We haven't experienced any justice since 1619, since we've been here. We haven't experienced any justice in 400 years. And I think, there's a new generation who are waking up to that history and to that consciousness and to that dynamic, understanding that, man, like this oppressor has never seen us as valued lives. Black lives have never mattered in this country. Yeah, it's a new slogan and it feels good and it's right. But the truth is that black lives have never mattered. And then there's the issue of, the poverty and how do people now begin to heal even after, the terror, how do we address the poverty? How do we address the food deserts? How do we address the lack of employment? We know that the state doesn't give a fuck, right? And so if the state and the ruling class doesn't care about the workers and the poor, how do we build these institutions, or at least how do we assist in the process of building those institutions where the people can become more self-determined and self-dependent and self-reliant, interdependent on each other versus dependent, on the ruling class, whether it be for, our daily maintenance and nourishment or whether it be for justice. So, I just wanted to kind of put that out there as I come to a close and conclusion.